Welcome to the SEC podcast, the original SEC versus Big Ten podcast, here live in the studio here at Oakland, California. What a beautiful day in the Bay. And welcome back to the show. Last two shows we covered in our predictions, who we think will finish, where will they finish in the SEC West from the bottom all the way up to fourth. We covered Texas A&M, Auburn, Mississippi State, and Arkansas. So before we get to the top three in the West, we're going to go ahead and dive over to the East, and we're going to eliminate the guys on the bottom, and we're going to go a little different than what's been before. We're going to go a little different than preview magazines. And why do you say that? Okay, well, Ron, here's the facts. Teams get better, but it doesn't mean they're good enough. Let me bring that back now. Teams get better, but it's not always good enough. And once you show that you're better, teams also prepare for you as well. So this week we're diving into this, and we're looking at these teams. Some teams, I'm looking around and the media is saying, hey, we think Vanderbilt's going to finish seventh. We got Florida finishing sixth. We got South Carolina, Missouri fighting for fourth and fifth, and we have Kentucky at third. We have Tennessee and chasing the heels of the Georgia Bulldogs. That's usually where you're going to see a lot of people say, well, Florida was a mess inning, even though they were almost going 8-4. But, losing to Vanderbilt and losing to Florida State, that's like losing two mediocre teams that you shouldn't be losing to. After you beat Texas A&M and South Carolina, how dare you win those games? How dare you lose them? What are we talking about here? So last year has no variance. Some teams get better. Some teams don't. Some teams get worse. Some teams lack improvement. Some teams are just stagnant. And if you're stagnant, you really got worse from the previous year. Who are you looking at to finish last? Is it Vanderbilt? Is it Missouri? Is it Florida? Is it South Carolina? Where does talent get in the way of how good a team program can be year in and year out? You establish a good culture. You're showing improvements in the strength and conditioning program. You're doing everything by the book, but at the end of the day, do you have the guns to kill those dogs on the other side? Those Gators, those Volunteers, those Gamecocks, those Tigers, Wildcats. The Commanders, they won two big-time games last year that should build their morale up. And from all practice reports in fall camp so far, they're hitting more than anybody. That's why I don't have them finishing last, folks. That's exactly right. You heard me right. And the real issue is I see something going totally wrong in the show me state, Missouri. Eli Drinkwitz, I think he's a good coach. I think so. He hasn't proven it. And people are really excited about that defense from last year. They definitely have some Florida talent in the middle of that defense at linebacker and safety. They have other players that possibly could be really good. They don't run the ball. And when you don't run the ball, your schedule's chaos. So we're going to dive into Missouri Tigers, folks. And the one thing I see is, how likely are you to win your non-conference games? And then the more likely you are to win your non-conference games, more likely you are to win those 50-50 SEC games against closely talented teams that you're quite not as talented. You might be a little bit more talented, but it's a battle of attrition nonetheless. Week 1, they open up at home against an inferior opponent in South Dakota. Missouri rarely ever has a real difficult non-conference schedule. They really don't have a real difficult schedule. They play Arkansas, and they also play. Let's see, they play the Florida, Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina, Kentucky, Arkansas, and they play LSU this year. So to stay from winning on the bottom, you have to win some games, and it's going to be hard to win games because the non-conference games don't count. They don't count. They're just warm-up, baby. They count on your overall schedule, but your conference games make up a bulk of 2/3 of your schedule. So now we're looking at the schedule. South Dakota, you open up at home. Easy win. That's food. Don't play with your food. Eat the food. You're the Missouri Tigers. You're in the SEC. You should win that game. South Dakota is a great FCS program, but you don't lose the FCS programs when you're in Missouri. You're a big boy. Play like a big boy. Next week, you play against Middle Tennessee in September 9th. You have that win. It should be a really easy win. You don't need to look at that game as a fan or as a rival and say they're struggling with that game. That's a sneaker, whatever you want to call it, a little sleeper game. No, it's not. But the next game is going to tell a lot about the program. And they're going to be home once again for 3 straight weeks. They're welcoming the Big 12 reigning champion. And that's Kansas State Wildcats. And this is an old division rivalry. That's a toss-up. I'm not predicting that game. All I say is if they win that game, they could do better than finishing 7th in the SEC possibly. They lose that game like I think they might. I think Kansas State has a better program, better coaching staff right now currently than Missouri. They have established a winning culture that the current staff has yet to establish there. So you're looking at possibly opening up 2-1 before you even get into SEC schedule. And then the following week, you're playing against Memphis, who might feel a little slighted that they're not in the, in the big boy leagues. I'm not sure if Memphis is going to the Big 12 anytime soon, but I don't think they went. So they're there. This is the old Mike Norvell program right there in St. Louis. The game's going to be played right there, and Missouri should come out on top, and we're going to predict so because that's your last game before you get into the nitty-gritty. You're playing 8 straight SEC games after this. You're ending September into a slate. You got all those rust out of you. You haven't shown anything. You should be 4-0. You're possibly 3-1. At worst case, you're at 2-2. And so now you're going into Vanderbilt week 1 of the SEC play. And most people count this as a win. And if you kind of look at what Vanderbilt's looking at, they're already more prepared for this game because they're opening up in week 0. Okay? Week 0, they're opening up. This time they're at home against Hawaii. Then as week 1 is, they're warming up again against Alabama A&M. So now they have 2 games before they go to Wake Forest. And they're going into Wake Forest to whoop Wake Forest's ass because they should have won last year. They have 2 home games to open up the season really early, and then they go into Wake Forest, and now they're going to University in Northern Las Vegas, UNLV, and University of Nevada, Las Vegas. Man, that's going to be an interesting game. You should win that game. You better win that game if you're Vandy. Because you're going into SEC slate a week earlier than Missouri, but you're going into, and you're going at home opening up against Kentucky, who's going to be a physical force. You've been playing against all these teams. You haven't been tested at the line of scrimmage, and so you're going into that game, Kentucky, with a little battered, bruised eyes out of that game, with a little close loss, because they're looking at you after they lost that game last year, and they want that win badly. So Vanderbilt can easily win this game, but I have them losing the game in a slow loss at home because, their home doesn't always equal a home field advantage. When they win, they win. It's not later on in the year when Nashville's a little cold and you're uninterested in the season. Kentucky would be highly motivated in this game to win this game, and I think they pull off the first win in this battle in the SEC conference play. And so Vanderbilt's going to come out really tough because they're 4-0 when they open up SEC at home. They lose at home to Kentucky, and now they have another game at home to Missouri. They're building this up. You see how I build these games up that you're seeing what both sides are looking at? And Vanderbilt's like, we lost to Kentucky, but we have to put everything to win this game. We have to win this game because they're the second worst team in the division. We can lose to Kentucky, but we can't lose to Missouri. And that's what the coach is selling the program, and that's how they're preparing. They're coming with the dogs now, and that's where they pull that win off. They pull that win against Missouri, and that's a tie-breaking possible win because there's going to be a lot of hard wins coming by for both schools. It's not going to be easy pulling any wins off because once Missouri loses at Vanderbilt, the morale's going down. And I don't think Drinkwitz is going to survive this. If he survives this season, it'll be a miracle because it's going to show that the program is really not having the expectations that they really do. I think he's a good coach, but I don't think he's good enough to win at this program. You have to really know how to develop. You have to have a keen for development at lower levels just to be able to win at this type of program consistently over 7 wins. It's hard to win in the SEC as it is. So you lose game 1 in the SEC. You possibly lost the game against Kansas City at home. And now you're coming back home following week against LSU, who has national championship aspirations. And last time you all played, it was like week 1 of the season. You all beat LSU. And there's not many players that remember it on LSU side, but they'll be reminded, they'll be motivated, and they're a really good road team. LSU likes to play on the road. They like that underdog mentality. So LSU is going to be a loss. And as I said, if Kentucky beat Vanderbilt, I think Kentucky beat Missouri. You go on the road the next following week to Kentucky. That's going to be a tough game to win. And you go into the following week, you're back home against a better South Carolina team that's finding their footing. They just got their ass whooped a couple times. They fought Georgia already. They fought Florida already. You haven't. So now this is a big L. And you go into a bye. You watch Georgia and Florida play. You're like shocked how the game goes. And now you're on the road. And Kirby's going to sell how you all almost whooped their ass last year. And now you're on the road to Georgia, Tennessee, and you got Tennessee at home and Florida at home. You go on the road to Arkansas. Though that's end of the season with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 straight losses. And if you lose Kansas State, that's 8 losses on the schedule. That can put you at 4-8 and a new coach. Do they have the stomach for it? They're building. They're still building. They're a year behind with the COVID, of course. We understand coaches that came in around COVID, they're a little behind. But this is a state of program where you're not seeing a good team finish like a good team because they're playing a lot of good teams. Okay, they're not a bet. Let's put it like this: how many teams on their schedule are more talented than Missouri? We're going to go from the back end and work to the front, okay? Arkansas is more talented than Missouri. There are players on Missouri that I would take because they used to be Florida Gators. But other than that, you don't really want any players for the Arkansas or Missouri. But you want more on Arkansas because you want KJ Jefferson. You want the best running back. So edges. Arkansas has more talent. Florida has more talent. Tennessee has more talent. Georgia, second team, has more talent. South Carolina has more talent. Kentucky has more talent. LSU has more talent. And you're equal talented with Kansas State, and you're slightly more talented than Vanderbilt. That's not a good recipe when Kansas State and Vanderbilt are the closest teams to your talent on your schedule. Because out there you get to Memphis, then South Dakota, and Middle Tennessee. If you're close to that, you shouldn't be in the Power 5 at all. So 4-8 is my selection right now. I think they could sneak to 5-7 possibly if they could stay healthy and catch teams and get hot. 7-5 is definitely in the works. Let's look at how would they finish 7-5? Who would they have to beat? Okay, you have South Dakota, Middle Tennessee, Kansas State, and Memphis. Those are 4 games. So after that, that's the 4 minimum. You have to win those games to go bowling. You have to have your mindset. You have to finish September to go bowling. So in your mind, you have to beat Vanderbilt. So now you're talking about 5-0. That's what Cousin Shane on that SEC podcast saying that Missouri's going to start off 5-0, but I got them already at 3-2 going into October. That's a total different point of view. So 5-0, that's 5 games right there. And so LSU, Kentucky. Now you're looking at, okay, South Carolina, Florida, and Arkansas. Those are 3 games. You got to win 2 out of those. Who do you win those to? Well, you're going to say South Carolina and Florida because those are the home games, right? Well, I agree with that statement. I agree with that mindset, but I don't agree with that perception of reality. I don't think they beat either team or 3. So those are your best 3 possible wins, and you lose all 3. It's going to be hard to get to 6 wins. So 5-7 is the best case scenario. I have them. But to get to 7, they'll have to beat South Carolina. They'll have to beat Florida. They'll have to beat Arkansas. 1 game on the road, 2 at home. But you do get Florida at the end in November, which could be a noon game or a night game. Most likely it's going to be a noon game. And if here's a rule about the SEC. If you want to know if you're going to get the best out of that team or if you're going to get the worst out of that team, this is how you really know. If it's a noon game and you're on the road for a noon game, you're not playing your best. If you're playing at home and it's a noon game and the opponent is less than you, you're not playing your best. So that's one of the rules. The more eyes on the game, the more motivated the players. So you could catch Florida off. It depends on their motivation. They're going to rivalry week. And it's possible. South Carolina is possible. It's possible they could beat Kansas State. It's possible they could beat Memphis. And it's possible they could beat Vanderbilt. It's possible they could win all their own games. And that includes LSU. That includes Tennessee, South Carolina, and Florida. But that's unlikely. I think this team is dealing with a lot of attrition. There's a lot of recruiting momentum right now due to NIL. But is it sustainable? We'll see come signing day. So that's basically it on how we're looking at Missouri. And we saw Vanderbilt last year come into the season and win 2 SEC games when they haven't won any in a while. And they ended up beating Kentucky. They were very close to beating Ole Miss. They played Ole Miss very strong in the first half. Ole Miss had to come alive in the second half. The Florida game was everything that could be luck into Vanderbilt's way. If Xavier Henderson is returning punts, they don't fumble that punt because he doesn't try to recover. He doesn't try to fair catch a punt inside the 5, and and he doesn't muff the punt and fall into the end zone for a touchdown recovery going into halftime and receiving the ball. So that was a lot after you had a 7-point lead. And that was a lot to recover for them. Wasn't able to run the ball effectively. The reads weren't going for the quarterback. He was showing his arm, but the game just didn't work that way for the Gators in a rebuild with a lot of injuries. So that's circumstances. So, of course, they have that in their hand that there are teams that can fall to Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's no longer the Vanderbilt of the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000s. Here in the 2020s, they have a coach who played for them, play fullback. They're getting more physical. They understand they're not the most talented team. They're going to play like a better team. And so Vanderbilt here has a possibility of winning a couple of SEC games off the rip. And it just all depends on how it plays. I have them losing some games closely, but it's possible they could go turn the tables. And so we went over their record previously earlier in the segment with Hawaii, Alabama A&M, at Wake Forest, at UNLV, and then come home to Kentucky and loses that game, and stays home and wins the game against Missouri. They go to Florida next week. I don't think they're going to be overlooked. Florida's going to be healthy, and that game's another L. So they drop to 1-2 in the conference. They lose the next game to Georgia. They go down to 1-3. At Ole Miss is winnable game, but I got them going down in that game, and it's obviously why they're out talented in these games. Now, this is where it gets interesting because the Ole Miss game is going to be a tough battle. And after you win a game against Missouri at home, you go on the road against Florida, you lose that hot game in October. You come back home, you lose against the national champions in Georgia. You go on the road and you're losing against Ole Miss. And now you come back home for your last home game and you're hosting the mighty Auburn Tigers, who I have finishing last in the SEC West. Now, this is a game where you could say we don't lose the food if you're in that locker room. And you're looking at each other in the locker room saying, we don't lose this game. We shouldn't lose this game. And so you're looking at each other and you're preparing for this game as if you shouldn't lose your last home game. How many home games have you won so far? You won against Hawaii. You won against Alabama A&M. You won against Missouri. Now you've had a total of how many losses at home? You lose against Kentucky at home. You lose against Georgia at home. So this is your last home game before you end the season on the road in the SEC East against rivals South Carolina and Tennessee, who's looking to whoop your ass. And you got Auburn Tigers at home. You have to win that game. This is a game you can win. It's not a game I think you should win. It's not a game that I would blink my eyes and say, oh, wow, when Vanderbilt actually won that game. It won't shock me to see them win this game or Ole Miss. It will shock me to see them beat Florida. It will shock me to see them beat Georgia because it will shock me to see them beat Kentucky. The reason why it will shock me because you already got that win in, and now you're on alert. Once you win against the big dogs, they're all like, we can't let this happen to us. We can't let Vanderbilt fuck us in the ass. No, we got to fuck them in the ass. And so when you want to fuck a program in the ass, you prepare for them, and then you out-talent them. And Vanderbilt is out-talented on all this roster except the first 4 weeks of the season. So winning against Missouri is a great win. And although they won 2 SEC games last year, it's going to be hard to get bowl eligible this year. You can, and you're going to need this game. You're going to need because you're going to have to beat Wake Forest. You're going to have to beat UNLV. You're going to have to beat Hawaii and A&M automatically. You need those 4 games to get bowl eligible because the schedule doesn't set up for anything else. That if you can find a way to beat Kentucky, that's awesome because that's the week before they host Florida. That's going to make that Kentucky game very difficult for Florida if you're finding a way to beat Kentucky at home for 2 straight years. Then you really put yourself on the map and put a target on your back. Now teams are going to be looking at you like they look at South Carolina or Tennessee. Like, wait a minute, what the fuck? We used to whoop Vanderbilt like a G5 program, like a FCS program. Now they're playing like an SEC program. Nobody wants to see that, but Vanderbilt fans, and I want to see it just for chaos. So maybe you win against Kentucky, but right now I don't have that. But I do have you beating Missouri because you're not finishing last in the East. It will take a lot to beat Florida at Florida in early October. I think they're prepared. They'll be playing Utah, Kentucky, and Tennessee, and I think they'll be motivated in that October stretch to finish strong. They have Georgia to close it out before they go into their gauntlet in November. You can give Georgia a scare, but I don't think Vanderbilt could beat Georgia's second team. Ole Miss and Auburn are the two games. You know, you want to get bowl eligible. That's the game that I'll keep knocking. I'm looking at the schedule over and over. And if somehow South Carolina is not where they should be, you're looking at 7-6 wins right now. And if you can find a way to beat Tennessee on the road at the end of the season while you're beating South Carolina, that's very unlikely. But if you beat Ole Miss and Auburn, you have some motivation. And if you're still healthy, you can get there. So Vanderbilt's a much better team. I think they're a much better team than they were last year, than they were under year one under Coach Shea. But the schedule doesn't favor them. So having that schedule being a little difficult, there's a reason why I'm not favoring Vanderbilt to win many games. But at the same time, I'm respecting them enough that I don't think they're finishing last in the SEC East. So not many people expected me to put Missouri at last. A lot of people have Missouri finishing in the top 3 in the SEC. They're a dog. They're looked at as a team to be looked at, possibly winning more than 7 games. 7 is the floor to many. But are they a better team? They have better talent, but are they a better team? Are they a better team than the teams they play on those Saturdays? It's all prediction. It's all games. It's all fun until shit hits the can. So this is it for our first one. We covered the 7, 6, 5, and 4 for the SEC West. We just covered 7 and 6 for the East. We're going to go back and cover 5 and 4 for the East before we start diving into 3 and 2 for the East and West. We'll do that together, and then we'll finish who finished first together. That's how we're going to do it. Many people are probably expecting norm, but when we get to the first, we're going to do all scenarios with them, how they can lose it, how they can best case scenario for them, worst case scenario and everything. Because once you're in the division winning race, you're a playoff factor and the national championship factor. That's all. We're signing out from Oakland, California, live in the streets. This is Ron from Oakland, from the original SEC versus Big Ten podcast. Check us out on YouTube. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe. We're going on Spotify very soon. Thank you so much for all those who chose to listen. Have a wonderful day.